Hey guys, welcome back. Welcome to part 2 of our look here at the 30th President of the United States, Calvin Coolidge. Of course, this is our next installment of our presidential series. I cannot believe we are up to the 30th President of the United States already. It seems like just a month ago we were starting this channel, so pretty crazy. But yes, this is part 2 of our look at the 30th President, Calvin Coolidge. Part 2, of course, will be all about the presidency, his legacy, and then, of course, his death and burial site and that sort of thing. So, I'm going to jump right in. I am flying solo for the audio, so I am going to jump right in here. I'm going to give you kind of the overview of Coolidge in the White House, read a couple things, and then from there, after I do these little synopsis overviews, I'll get into a couple fun facts, maybe even some bizarre facts, and then I'll show you the death, and we'll read from the President is Dead book by Louis Picone and all that stuff that we always do. So here we go. Coolidge in the White House. The Harding-Coolidge ticket won the 1920 election in a landslide, and the men took office in March of 1921. Coolidge quickly grew frustrated with his largely ceremonial duties as vice president. But just 2 years later, Harding's sudden death on August 2nd of 1923 unexpectedly vaulted him to the Oval Office. Coolidge's no-nonsense approach and somber nature stood in stark contrast to his predecessor's genial personality and casual leadership style. The differences served Coolidge well as he worked to clean up the corruption that had plagued the Harding administration. He appointed a special counsel to investigate the Teapot Dome oil lease scandal, in which the U.S. Secretary of the Interior was accused and later convicted of accepting bribes to lease federal oil reserves without competitive bidding. And he dismissed Harding's tarnished U.S. Attorney General Harry M. Daughtry. Coolidge's reputation for honesty and integrity helped him restore public faith in government. Coolidge ran for president in 1924 and won decisively over the Democratic candidate, U.S. Representative John W. Davis of West Virginia, and the Progressive Party candidate, U.S. Senator Robert M. La Follette of Wisconsin. Coolidge's policies in office continued to be guided by his strong belief in private enterprise and small government. He cut taxes, limited government spending, and stacked regulatory commissions with people sympathetic to business. Coolidge once said, "The chief business of the American people is business." He also rejected U.S. membership in the League of Nations and set high tariffs on imported goods to protect American industry. Coolidge remained popular throughout his presidency. The Roaring Twenties were a time of fast-paced social, cultural, and technological changes, and many Americans lived boisterously and spent extravagantly. Some young women adopted the flapper lifestyle and drank alcohol, smoked, danced, and wore shorter skirts, makeup, and bobbed hair. Women also voted, having won that right with the ratification of the 19th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution in 1920. Jazz music and Art Deco architecture flourished. Charles Lindbergh made his pioneering solo airplane flight across the Atlantic Ocean in 1927. More people owned automobiles and purchased mass-produced goods such as canned foods. During this era of societal transformation, Coolidge served as a sort of father figure. The quiet, respectable, and frugal president provided a comforting symbol of old-fashioned responsibility and virtue. So, interestingly enough, pretty cool stuff there with Coolidge. Now I'm going to give you another synopsis overview of his presidency here. At 2:30 in the morning, 51-year-old Vice President Calvin Coolidge was awakened at his family's Vermont home with the news of Harding's death. He became the sixth vice president to take over for a deceased leader. His father, a notary public, immediately swore him in as the 30th president of the United States. Then, the no-nonsense New Englander went back to bed. He was an incredibly successful politician. He started off as mayor of Northampton, Massachusetts, and sort of rose through the ladder in Massachusetts politics. He may have lost one election, I think, in his career. He would be the island of calm, of moral strength and integrity amid the hurly-burly of the 1920s. Calvin Coolidge faced the challenge of restoring the dignity of the presidency. So he authorizes a very intensive investigation of the Teapot Dome scandal. And he also commits his presidency to firmer, clearer principles. Coolidge and Harding believed in what was then called laissez-faire capitalism, that the government should govern very little, a hands-off attitude toward the private sector. Although Coolidge shared a conservative approach to the economy with his predecessor, and also retained the scandal-free members of Harding's cabinet, the personalities of the two men could not have been more different. Harding was a procrastinator. Coolidge kept a strict schedule, starting his day at 6:15 in the morning. Harding had mistresses, while Coolidge was loyal to his wife Grace. And while Harding had a gift for gab, Coolidge barely uttered a word. Coolidge was known as Silent Cal from fairly early on. He was just naturally a sort of withdrawn, quiet guy. He did not like to glad hand. He was not an extrovert. One of my favorite stories of Calvin Coolidge of all time, there's two things I love. One of those two things is when he was sitting next to a woman at dinner one night, she was remarking on his laconic qualities and said, "I have a bet with a friend that I can make you say more than 3 words, Mr. President." And he leaned into her and he replied, "You lose." I absolutely love that Calvin Coolidge story. I think it's great. Coolidge became president just as the economy was showing signs of recovery from the post-World War depression, and he believed he knew how to keep it growing. Wilson had very high taxes in World War I. Harding started to bring them down. Then Coolidge came along and said, "That's not enough. It must be much lower." Coolidge, like Harding before him, signed sharp tax reductions into law. The top income tax rate during World War I had been 77%. Under Coolidge, it reached a low of 25%. What followed was a spending binge the likes of which the country had never seen. Under President Calvin Coolidge, the optimism of the roaring 20s had swept the nation. Coolidge had declared, "The business of America is business." And business was booming. Consumer spending became sort of uncorked in the 1920s. It was the decade of cars and radios and consumer appliances and household appliances. And there was this rising and expanding middle class that was really enjoying these benefits of modern life. At the start of the 1920s, 35% of American homes had electricity. By the end of the decade, it would nearly double. That influx of power fueled a wave of new electric appliances and products for the home. More than 200 refrigerator models came to market. Nearly a quarter of American households bought washing machines and vacuum cleaners. And half owned a radio. It was called the Coolidge Prosperity, and a lot of people gave him credit for that. Ronald Reagan was a teenager when Calvin Coolidge was president and greatly admired him. When Ronald Reagan went to the White House, he put up a picture of Calvin Coolidge. After finishing out the last year of Harding's term and riding a wave of good feeling and popularity, Coolidge easily won re-election. He was inaugurated on a cool day in early March 1925. Thousands had gathered in the Capitol to watch, but for the first time, millions of others were listening. Calvin Coolidge is the first president that more than a few Americans actually heard. This has a tremendous impact on the country and his popularity. And in some ways, because he was naturally introverted, he found public speaking, which he could prepare for, as a way to get his ideas across very effectively. Before the radio, how did you give a speech before the mic? You bellowed, and Coolidge was not a bellower. And there was this great sudden surprise, which is the radio was coming in, and the voice that was poor for the lecture hall was ideal for radio. Silent Cal chose his words carefully, so when he spoke, his words carried real weight. In the same way Teddy Roosevelt used newspapers and John F. Kennedy used television, Coolidge masterfully used the radio to build a public consensus around his policies and build pressure on Congress for support. So pretty cool that Coolidge, first one to ever be heard, his inauguration over the radio. And he was really the first president that a lot of people heard his voice. So right now I'm actually going to give you like a little minute or two sample of some of Calvin Coolidge's speech, just to kind of let you listen. And, you can kind of listen into what the people of the 1920s were listening to as they sat, by the radio, fireside, radio side, listening to our president, Calvin Coolidge, speak. So here you go.
Realizing that we cannot live unto ourselves alone, we have contributed of our resources and our counsel to the relief of the suffering and the settlement of the disputes among the European nations. Because of what America is and what America has done, a firmer courage, a higher hope inspires the heart of all humanity. Conditions must be provided under which people can make a living and work out of their difficulties. But there is another element, more important than all, without which there cannot be the slightest hope of a permanent peace. The country needs every ounce of its energy to restore itself. The costs of government are all assessed upon the people. This means that the farmer is doomed to provide a certain amount of money out of the sale of his produce, no matter how low the price, to pay his taxes. The manufacturer, the professional man, the clerk must do the same from their income. The wage earner, often at a higher rate when compared with his earning, makes his contribution, perhaps not directly, but indirectly, in the advanced cost of everything he buys. The expenses of the government reach everybody. Taxes take from everyone a part of his earnings and force everyone to work for a certain part of his time for the government. When we come to realize that the yearly expenses of the governments of this country, the stupendous sum of about $7,500,000,000, we get some $100 million is needed by the national government and the remainder by local governments.
Pretty cool stuff. The voice of our 30th president, Calvin Coolidge. So, Coolidge was pretty, he was very much a loner. He had friends, he had allies, but he never had terribly strong relations with Congress. Coolidge sometimes did not put a chair in his office. because then his guests would sit down and have more time to ask a favor. It was cruel, it was rude, but he was saving the American people money. Coolidge was also resolute in his fiscal conservatism. When prices for farm commodities began slipping, Congress passed a bill to use government funds to keep farmers afloat. Calvin Coolidge vetoed it. Though thousands of small farmers went under, his veto underscored that even a conservative president still had the opportunity to brandish the power of the office. At one point, he said, this country has enough laws and regulations. I don't think we need any more. So he really understood the symbolic power of the presidency, even as he was not a programmatically, legislatively activist president. The presidency is supposed to be about policy, but of course, it's really about temperament, isn't it? It's about who you are and how you react under pressure. Calvin Coolidge reacted by stopping, halting, preventing. Coolidge was the great refrainer. And Coolidge's final act of restraint came after 5.5 years in office. He chose not to seek re-election. Some said this decision had to do with a tragic occurrence suffered by 6 presidents from John Adams to John F. Kennedy, the death of his child. When he was president, his son Calvin died very suddenly from a blister from playing tennis. Calvin didn't show his mother his blister early enough, and it went septic, and he died. He said of Calvin, his son, when he died, the glory of the presidency went with him. There you have it. Pretty much an overview of the presidency of Calvin Coolidge. The sad tragedy of his son dying when Coolidge was in office. I'm going to read you some fun facts, some interesting facts. First, before I get into that, I do want to, discuss his re-election. I always like to kind of go over, re-elections of presidents and that sort of thing, or their first election. And he won big time. Calvin Coolidge, he was the Republican, nominee. He ran up against John W. Davis, the Democratic nominee, and then Robert M. La Follette, who was a progressive socialist, farmer labor type guy. But just to give you an idea, Coolidge, he won with 382 electoral votes to John Davis's 136 to La Follette's 13. So he actually carried 35 states, Calvin Coolidge did. The popular vote, he got 15.7 million votes. He got about 54% of the popular vote, Calvin Coolidge did, in his re-election bid of 1924. So, as you can see, it truly was a landslide for Coolidge. It wasn't close at all. If you're actually, you're probably seeing the maps and stuff on your screen. Coolidge won everything basically from northeast all the way out west. Of course, the only states he didn't win were pretty much the southern states, Texas, Florida, Georgia, Alabama, the Carolinas, those sort of states. But everything north and then west, he won. And it was very decisive, wasn't even close. Coolidge won in a landslide. This is in his re-election bid in 1924, after he finished out Harding's term when he took over office when Harding died. So now a little bit about the post-presidential years. Although many people believe that Coolidge could have won re-election in 1928, he publicly announced his decision not to run on August 2nd of 1927 in a simple note delivered to reporters at a press conference. The physical strain of the job, as well as the death of his father and his youngest son, had depleted his energy and interest in another term. The Republican Party turned to Herbert Hoover, who had served as Secretary of Commerce under both Harding and Coolidge, as its candidate. And after departing the White House, Coolidge retired to Northampton, where he occupied himself by writing his memoirs and contributing political commentary to magazines. Less than a year after he left office, the U.S. stock market crashed and the economy plummeted into the Great Depression. Although Coolidge had received a great deal of credit for the prosperity of the 1920s, he recognized that he bore some responsibility for the severe economic downturn. He admitted to friends that he had spent his presidency avoiding the big problems, and as William Allen White quoted him as saying in his biography, "a Puritan in Babylon." Coolidge died of a heart attack at the age of 60 at his Northampton home on January 5th of 1933, which of course we're going to get into here in a minute when I read you, things of right from The President is Dead. But now, let's hear some fun facts. Let's hear some interesting or kind of quirky, wacky things about Coolidge. All right, here we go. Coolidge's own father swore him in, as I had mentioned before, in a moment that had never transpired before and has never been repeated since. Calvin Coolidge was sworn into the presidential office by his own father, also named John Calvin Coolidge. The pair found themselves together while the younger Coolidge was visiting his father in Vermont. News arrived of Harding's sudden death, which prompted Coolidge Sr., a notary public, to swear in his son in the middle of the night. And what I love about that story is not only did his father swear him in the middle of the night, I told you I have two favorite Coolidge stories. One is the story about the dinner, the female guest with the bet and getting to say more than 3 words. I love that. And this is my other favorite Coolidge story. Swore in the middle of the night in the mountains of Vermont, in Plymouth Notch, Vermont. Then he goes back to bed. I love it. It's true. What else is there to do? It was like 2 in the morning. It was the middle of the night, but how funny is that? You just got sworn in as President of the United States, and what do? You go back to sleep. I love it. I absolutely love that story. And I'm going to be showing you pictures of Plymouth Notch and the house where he was sworn in at and all that stuff in a little bit later toward the end of this video. Coolidge was popular for doing nothing. In contrast to presidents who lent a heavy hand in American affairs, Coolidge captured the public's favor by essentially doing nothing. He allowed businesses to prosper by minimizing government interference and satisfied voters who believed bureaucracy had become too overwhelming. But his conservative approach may have been a little too reserved. He's quoted as saying that he spent much of his presidency avoiding the big problems. Critics later argued his reluctance to stem the stock market speculation boom in the 1920s may have contributed to the market crash in 1929, as we just touched on before. Coolidge was not very talkative. Complementing his understated political style was Coolidge's economy of words. Though he was communicative with the public, holding about 8 press conferences a month and making regular radio addresses, direct dialogues were more succinct. He often answered yes or no to questions posed by the press or associates and prided himself on remaining largely quiet in social settings. According to legend, a dinner companion offered to bet she could extract at least 3 words from him during the evening. Coolidge turned to her and said, "You lose." Love that. His wife, Grace Coolidge, brought attention to the hearing impaired. Grace, whom Coolidge had married in 1905, was a one-time instructor for the hearing impaired, a disability that had not received much in the way of national attention. But Grace was interested in raising awareness, educating the public at large, and inviting Helen Keller to the White House. Grace was able to raise $2 million for the Clark School for the Deaf, assisted by her husband, who often told friends to contribute to the school. Pretty cool stuff. Coolidge rode a mechanical horse for exercise. After his horseback riding activities were reportedly curtailed by concerned Secret Service agents, Coolidge installed a mechanical horse saddle in the White House. The machine ran on electricity and was able to mimic the bouncy agitation of trotting or galloping, and Coolidge rode the contraption up to 3 times a day, believing it was beneficial to his health. Referred to as Thunderbolt by the press, the device was widely mocked by observers who felt riding a replica horse was not conduct befitting a president. Coolidge eventually tired of it, opting for other ill-advised exercise contraptions like a belly-reducing vibrating machine. Yeah, just to kind of read a little further about that, I got something else here about that. Where is it? Yep, he installed a mechanical horse to keep in shape. In his youth, Coolidge was an enthusiastic horseman, and he carried his passion for riding to the White House, only to be pulled to a halt by Secret Service agents who insisted horseback riding was too dangerous an activity for a president. Coolidge was understandably grumpy about swearing off one of his favorite hobbies, and he complained loudly enough that New York banker Dwight W. Morrow decided to send him a mechanical hobby horse because, as luck would have it, Morrow had an extra one just laying around. Instead of looking his 470-pound gift horse in the mouth, Coolidge rigged it up and resumed riding, this time from the comfort of the White House. Thunderbolt, as the mechanical horse was nicknamed, was one of many health-conscious inventions by John Harvey Kellogg, whose legacy has filled the cereal bowls of countless early risers. Kellogg apparently also perfected a mechanical camel, which rocks side to side as opposed to the back and forth of his iron equine. While Thunderbolt was deemed a positive force on Coolidge's liver and weight management, the horse quickly began to wound his pride. Coolidge was mocked in and out of the White House for his emasculating hobby horse. Eventually, whether to preserve his waning machismo or simply out of boredom, Coolidge retired Thunderbolt, who is now immortalized at the Calvin Coolidge Presidential Library and Museum in Northampton, Massachusetts. While visitors to the museum are strictly forbidden from mounting the weary steed, people admit he may or not have fervently snapped a photo of himself atop Thunderbolt during one of his visits. People have said this apparently, so I thought that was pretty funny. Good stuff. What else here? Coolidge was the first sitting president to actually visit Cuba. Coolidge was the first, and until Barack Obama went there in 2016, the only president to travel to Cuba while still in office. When he arrived in Havana for a conference, Coolidge seemed pleased at the warm reception expressed by citizens there, so much that he temporarily broke free of his laconic stature and took a bow. Maybe it was the grandiose entrance. Coolidge pulled up to Havana in the USS Texas, a World War I battleship. Pretty interesting. This is funny. Coolidge pardoned a raccoon. Calvin Coolidge was very fond of animals, collecting everything from cats to birds to lion cubs that he wryly named Tax Reduction and Budget Bureau. For Thanksgiving in 1926, an admirer sent him a live raccoon with the suggestion he cook it and consume it as part of the family dinner. Wary of sampling raccoon meat, Calvin Coolidge pardoned the animal, and it soon became a close friend of his wife's and given the name Rebecca Raccoon. But the pet's undomesticated status became a source of contention among the Secret Service. She was prone to ripping up furniture and speeding through the White House. Rebecca was eventually donated to a zoo in 1928, Coolidge's final full year in office. And in that kind of vein of his love for animals, this is kind of cool. I thought this was neat. Calvin Coolidge turned the White House into a veritable menagerie. Raised on a secluded farm in Plymouth Notch, Vermont, Coolidge took comfort in being surrounded by wildlife. He and his wife, Grace, owned pets both wild and domesticated. Dogs, cats, birds, and raccoons were among the many species that overran the White House during Coolidge's tenure, terrorizing milkmen and baffling the Secret Service. Just before Coolidge's inauguration in 1925, Edmund Starling, Coolidge's Secret Service chief, moseyed down into the basement to find his new charge trying to stuff a black cat into a crate with a rooster. Coolidge was pithy as ever. He just wanted to see what would happen. Once the public got wind that their president had a penchant for the furry and feathered, stranger and stranger packages began to arrive at Pennsylvania Avenue. He was just flooded with animals, says David Petruzza, historian and author of Calvin Coolidge, a documentary biography. Some of these gifts were simply too wild for the Oval Office, though, and had to be transferred to the Smithsonian's National Zoo. Among them were a pygmy hippo named Billy, a wallaby, and 2 lion cubs that Coolidge cheekily named Tax Reduction and Budget Bureau. But perhaps the oddest pet repurposing happened in November of 1926. Hoping to win Coolidge over, a cohort of well-intentioned admirers shipped him a live raccoon with the intent of having it roasted as the centerpiece of his Thanksgiving dinner. But the Coolidges, finding the raccoon sweet and friendly, couldn't bear to see her killed. And so it was out of the frying pan and into the arms of the First Lady. Just a few short weeks later, the newest member of the Coolidge household got gussied up for Christmas. Adorned in a red ribbon, among the presented, piled high by the Christmas tree, was a shiny new collar, bearing the title, Rebecca Raccoon of the White House. Like many other Coolidge's pets, Rebecca was spoiled rotten. While she had likely dined in dumpsters before her relocation to Washington, D.C., Rebecca's diet in the White House consisted of chicken, eggs, green shrimp, persimmons, and cream. According to Amity Schell's, author of Coolidge, Rebecca was often toted around in her own basket by Grace, making public appearances at summer parties and Easter egg rolls. Just as often, Rebecca could be found draped around Coolidge's neck like a masked scarf as he went about his daily duties. Eventually, Rebecca got too unruly even for the Coolidges. After she made several blotched escape attempts, they reluctantly moved her to the National Zoo. Fearing she might be lonely in her new home, Coolidge and Grace even found her a male companion named Reuben. But their blind date was, alas, ill-fated, and Reuben eventually fled the zoo. He ran away from Rebecca. Coolidge was deeply attached to his 4-legged companions. When Rob Roy, a favorite collie, fell ill in 1928, Calvin Coolidge rushed him not to a veterinarian, but to Walter Reed Army Hospital for surgery. Sadly, Rob Roy didn't survive the night. In an outpouring of emotion that for Silent Cal was downright gushy, according to Petruzza, Coolidge wrote of the dog in his autobiography, "He was a stately companion of great courage and fidelity. I know he would bark for joy as the grim boatman ferried him across the dark waters of the Styx. Yet his going left me lonely on the hither shore." So Calvin Coolidge was an animal lover. I love it. Some other little fun facts here. His marriage began and ended with a close shave. Calvin Coolidge and Grace Donahue were, by all accounts, happily married. The pairing was unlikely. Stoic Coolidge courting the outgoing, vivacious Grace was a surprise to many. In their case, opposites certainly attracted. The first time Grace saw Coolidge, she glimpsed him shaving through the window of a boarding house bathroom in Northampton. Coolidge was wearing nothing but underwear and one of his signature derby hats. But rather than being appalled at the indecency, Grace just burst out laughing. He wasn't angry, though. He looked over and just thought, "I like her." On his many walks, Coolidge would frequent the storefronts of downtown Washington. While frugal in many other respects, if he saw a dress or hat he thought Grace might like, he almost always had it promptly packaged and sent to the White House. Reflecting on their marriage later in life, Coolidge once said, "We thought we were made for each other. For almost a quarter of a century, she has borne with my infirmities, and I have rejoiced in her graces." Their relationship, of course, was not without its hiccups. According to Petruza, the biographer, Coolidge could be fiercely protective of Grace. In her most famous portrait, Grace was painted posing with Coolidge's colleague, Rob Roy. Envisioning the portrait rendered in a patriotic color palette, Grace donned a red dress to contrast with the dog's white coat, which the Coolidges had reportedly bleached to hide a few of Rob Roy's off-color spots. But bright colors were considered a bold fashion statement at the time, and Coolidge wryly remarked that Grace could achieve the same striking effects by simply dyeing the dog red and wearing white instead. Coolidge died suddenly of complications from heart disease in 1933. After returning from a half day at work, Grace was the first to find him on the floor of the bathroom in their home in Northampton, midway through shaving his face. Pretty interesting. Calvin Coolidge was the original helicopter parent, but the person for whom Coolidge's patience most often ran short was with his son John, with whom he could be stern. In 1924, while John was attending Amherst College, Coolidge wrote a letter berating John for failing to take his studies seriously. "I want you to keep in mind that you have been sent to college to work," Coolidge wrote. "Nothing else will do you any good. Nobody in my class who spent their time in other ways has ever amounted to anything. Unless you want to spend your time working, you may just as well leave college." Coolidge then more or less told John that, when it came to social engagements, he needed to know exactly what his son was doing and who he was doing it with. "He took the hide off John," Petruza said. In 1926, Coolidge indefinitely instated a Secret Service agent as a 24/7 bodyguard for John. The Coolidges had received a series of threatening letters, so the president was likely concerned for his son's safety. But perhaps cloaked beneath the veneer of security was Coolidge's underlying exasperation with his son's continued shenanigans. From that point on, the agent shared quarters with John near the Amherst campus and rarely strayed from his side. While John was able to attend classes and occasionally spend time with friends outside of his company, the agent also became a bit of a personal life coach, advising the president's son on matters from his health to the quality of his companions. Very cool. Helicopter parent Calvin Coolidge. And unlike his predecessor, he was a champion for civil rights. One of Coolidge's quieter legacies was the Indian Citizenship Act of 1924, wherein all Native Americans were granted U.S. citizenship. This step by Calvin Coolidge was one of several that reflected his interest in advancing civil rights. Over the course of his tenure in the White House, he fought, unsuccessfully I might add, to make lynching a federal crime. He had a certain magnanimity, says Shales. He understood that diversity brought a lot to the table. In 1924, an angry voter wrote Coolidge complaining that a black man was attempting to run for Congress. Coolidge was so appalled by the letter that he published his own indignant reply. During the war, 500,000 colored men and boys were called up under the draft, not one of whom sought to evade it. A colored man is precisely as much entitled to submit his candidacy as any other citizen. Coolidge himself put it best in his address before the American Legion Convention at Omaha, Nebraska in October of 1925. Whether one traces his Americanism back 3 centuries to the Mayflower or 3 years of the steerage is not half so important as whether his Americanism of today is real and genuine. No matter by what various crafts we came here, we are all now in the same boat. You know what? Bravo to Calvin Coolidge. Bravo. So, there you go. A little bit about Calvin Coolidge's presidency, some quirky things. Another quirky thing, one thing I want to end with, Apparently, this is rumored, that Calvin Coolidge had a morning ritual of having someone rub Vaseline on his head while he ate breakfast. The unusual also extended to his choice of pets, 2 raccoons named Reuben and Rebecca, who would sometimes run around the White House. The Vaseline thing is interesting. I never heard that before, so definitely news to me. And last thing before we get into the death and burial site of Calvin Coolidge, the Coolidge tree. It's more than just a name right here in my home state of New Jersey. A surprising number of trees have been named for presidents, but most are lame claims to fame. Aside from the name, the presidents themselves usually have nothing to do with the trees. Not this one. A little plaque set into the ground at the base of this tree's trunk documents that both President and First Lady Coolidge stood right here when the Coolidge tree was planted on the 4th of July in 1926. It was, in fact, Coolidge's birthday. This is actually in Camden, New Jersey. There's a tree, right here. Calvin Coolidge stood right there when the tree was planted, and it was actually on his birthday. So the Coolidge tree here in Camden, New Jersey. I'm showing you pictures here of the Coolidge tree, but I also intend to go there. So hopefully you will be seeing a few extra additional photos of me if I can get there. It is Memorial Day weekend, so I'm hoping to get there over the next couple days. It's not too far from me, about a maybe 30-minute drive or so. So hopefully I'll be able to add some more pictures. But if not, the picture you're seeing here on your screen, that is the Coolidge tree there in Camden, New Jersey. Pretty cool stuff. So now, it is time for you-know-what. The death, the burial site, and all that stuff of Calvin Coolidge, our 30th president. And we're going to be reading directly from the book, The President is Dead by Louis Bacone, as we do every week here at Dead History. So, here we go. The death sites, and burial sites of Calvin Coolidge. In 1895, Calvin Coolidge first moved to Northampton, Massachusetts, into a modest house. Following his presidency, and after publishing his life story, the autobiography of Calvin Coolidge in 1929, he was able to afford a larger home. The next year, he purchased a mansion on Hampton Terrace called The Beeches, which afforded him the privacy that he greatly desired. On January 5th of 1933, Coolidge awoke at 7 a.m. to a pleasant morning. At the age of 60, the former president generally enjoyed good health. He had complained of indigestion for the past 3 weeks, but it was not considered serious. In retrospect, he may have been experiencing heart pain. After breakfast, he went to his office around 8:30 a.m., where he met his personal secretary, Harry Ross. Shortly afterward, Coolidge felt ill and told Ross, I guess we'll go up to the house. They arrived a few minutes past 10 a.m., and Coolidge spoke briefly with his wife, Grace, before she went shopping. "Don't you want the car?" he asked. But since it was such a nice day, she declined and walked instead. Those were the last words he would speak to her. Coolidge worked on a jigsaw puzzle of George Washington and spoke with Ross about his beloved birthplace in Plymouth Notch, Vermont. He reminisced about his ancestors, and the two spoke of a partridge hunting trip they had recently taken. Coolidge walked into the kitchen for a glass of water, and at 11:30 a.m., Ross helped him upstairs to his bedroom for his daily nap. The president removed his jacket and vest and lay down, but about 20 minutes later felt a chill and went to the basement to stoke the furnace. There he saw the caretaker, Robert S. Smith, and greeted him in his usual casual manner. "Howdy do, Robert." These were his last words. Coolidge returned to his bedroom to resume his nap. Grace returned at 12:25 p.m., and after Ross told her that her husband was not feeling well, she went upstairs to check on him. She found him not in his bed, but sprawled on his back on the adjoining bathroom floor. With his arms outstretched and a calm look on his face. Tragically, he was dead. Being found dead on a bathroom floor was not considered dignified for a former president and led some newspapers to report that Grace had found him on the bed. Coolidge's family physician, Dr. Edward W. Brown, estimated he had died 15 minutes before Grace had found him and released a statement. There is no doubt that Mr. Coolidge died as the result of a sudden heart attack. The technical name for his fatal attack, as it will appear upon the death certificate, is coronary thrombosis, the busting of the large artery entering the heart. With Coolidge's passing, there was no living former president. Herbert Hoover had lost the 1932 re-election campaign of Franklin Roosevelt, but at the time, he was still president. Coolidge's body was placed on his bed, where it remained for the night. He was dressed in striped trousers, wing-collar shirt, and white striped tie, and was placed in a gray bronze casket with white satin lining and a plate that simply read, Calvin Coolidge, 1872 to 1933. The next day, the coffin was set in the living room by the fireplace. There would be no elaborate state funeral. Grace knew her husband would have preferred a simple ceremony, free of pomp and ostentation. At 8:10 a.m. on January 7th, 6 Northampton policemen carried the casket to a hearse. Honorary pallbearers included Coolidge's Secretary of Commerce William F. Whiting, Superior Court Judge Thomas J. Hammond, Massachusetts State Senator William M. Butler, Northampton Mayor Homer C. Bliss, former Connecticut Governor John H. Trumbull, and the less notable Northampton book dealer and deacon at the Jonathan Edwards Congregational Church, Clifford H. Lyman. There was no great procession. Instead, the hearse followed a single policeman on a motorcycle. There was obviously a funeral. There was a crowd of mourners outside the Jonathan Edwards Congregational Church for the funeral on January 7th of 1933, there in Northampton, Massachusetts. And that was really it. That's pretty much what it was. Now, the death sites. The Coolidge's home was constructed in 1914 and designed in the English Revival style by Richard Henry Dana and Henry K. Murphy. It was a 16-bedroom, 4-bathroom house, featured a gabled roof, shingled siding, and 2 granite gateposts at the entrance. It became known as the Beeches for the 80 beech trees on the property. Interestingly enough, the former president called his purchase of the home a modest place with a little land. But to most Americans, especially during the Great Depression, it was anything but. The luxurious home sat on 9 acres and featured an interior elevator, a swimming pool, and tennis courts. Coolidge was a private man, and few people in the town had ever spoken with the former president. After his death, a reporter for the Reading Eagle tried to find a local with a personal anecdote. The message boy remembered Coolidge as a good fellow, before adding, he didn't tip, but he was a good fellow. After Coolidge's funeral, President Hoover went to the Beeches to offer Grace his condolences. She continued to live there for another 3 years before putting it up for sale in 1936. It's located, the Beeches, the home, the Northampton home where Coolidge lived and died, is located at 16 Hampton Terrace in Northampton, Massachusetts. The home is a private residence and not open to visitors. To learn about the 30th president, visit the Calvin Coolidge Presidential Library near the home at the Forbes Library. So, pictures you're probably seeing on your screen as I've been speaking, that is pictures of Beeches there in Northampton. I have never visited there. I've never been there. These are all stock photos that I found online. These are not photos I took myself, but that is Beeches where Calvin Coolidge lived and where he died. The funeral, the Coolidges worshipped at the Jonathan Edwards Congregational Church up until the Sunday before his death. At the time, it was called a historic edifice, but it was later torn down and another church was built at the site. So the church where his funeral was doesn't even stand. And then, here we go. The cemetery where he's buried, the Plymouth Notch Cemetery, was established before 1800. Many of Coolidge's ancestors are also buried there, as is his son, who died in 1924 while Coolidge was in office. The cemetery has no gates or posted visiting hours. It is a roadside cemetery in the middle of the mountains of Vermont. And let me tell you, folks, I've seen every presidential gravesite with the exception right now, currently, of Reagan and Nixon out in California, which I do plan on getting to in the next month or two, hopefully. I've seen all of them. I've seen everything from the Eternal Flame there, Kennedy's in Arlington Cemetery. I've seen Lincoln's tomb, the elaborate, huge Lincoln's tomb in Springfield, Illinois. I've seen Grant's tomb in New York City. Even Coolidge's predecessor, Warren Harding's memorial tomb there in Marion, Ohio. Huge. Calvin Coolidge's gravesite is one single tombstone, as you see here on the pictures on your screen. It's nothing elaborate. It's nothing extravagant. It is literally, when you're driving, it's right around the corner from a ski resort there in Vermont. If I can remember the ski resort, I'll throw up the name on the screen. You're actually probably seeing pictures now of, it looks like mountains. That's actually pictures I took driving to Coolidge's gravesite. You're literally in the mountains of Vermont. Like I said, you're only a few miles around the corner from a ski resort in Vermont. It is in the mountains. It's tucked away. This small little village of Plymouth Notch, Vermont. It's awesome. It is a roadside grave. I mean, you literally pull your car off the side of the road in this little, cutout in the road, and you walk across the roadway, and you walk up these steps, and there it is. There's this grave. It's awesome. It is so quaint, and it is only, and I kid you not, maybe a mile to a mile and a half down the road from his birthplace and from the home that he got sworn in by his father, right there in Plymouth Notch, Vermont. So other pictures you're seeing on your screen, that's the homestead and everything of the Coolidges in Plymouth Notch, Vermont, where he was sworn in, birthplace of Coolidge, all this stuff. It is awesome. It's like a mile away from the gravesite. It's right there. And the coolest thing is when you're leaving the gravesite, at least the way I went, you go through these back windy mountain roads of Vermont, and within a couple miles from his gravesite, there on the side of the road is a moose crossing sign. Moose crossing next 2 miles or something like that. It's so awesome. It really speaks volumes of who Coolidge was. Coolidge was a quiet, gentle, very conservative, just, kept to himself, introverted man. And his gravesite, it speaks volumes to that. It's just so quaint and awesome. I urge anyone who wants to do presidential gravesites, go do Coolidge's if you can in the fall or the winter. Now, in the winter, be careful, because if there's a ton of snow there, you might not even be able to get there. But if you can get there in the fall when it's beautiful, New England, the foliage, just do it. You will love it, I guarantee. So, there you go. That is a look at the life, legacy, presidency, death, and burial site. One of Dead History's TJ, myself's favorites. There it is, of Calvin Coolidge, our 30th President of the United States. I hope you enjoyed this look in our next presidential series installment. And of course, next week, we're going to take a look at the 31st President of the United States, Herbert Hoover. And we will get into Hoover next week. Hope you enjoyed this look at Coolidge. And as his campaign poster said, keep it cool with Coolidge. Keeping it cool with Coolidge. I love it. Calvin Coolidge, one of my favorite presidents, and definitely one of my favorite gravesites. So, thanks, guys. Thanks for the support. Thanks for tuning in. Thank you for everything. You guys are the best. Stay tuned for next week, and we'll see you then. Happy Memorial Day, and a very, very special thank you to all the servicemen and women who have sacrificed the ultimate sacrifice for all of us, their lives, as they served our country. That is what this holiday is for, is to memorialize and remember the men and women who have lost their lives so that I can do silly things like these YouTube videos. And we can go to barbecues this weekend. And we can go to the beaches or the boardwalks or the ballparks, wherever we want to go. A very special thank you and a remembrance to all of those men and women this weekend and all the time. Thank you. See you next week, folks. Bye-bye. Hey guys, TJ here, Dead History. And right behind me, right there, that is the Coolidge tree, the Calvin Coolidge tree, right here in Camden, New Jersey. I did make it here. It is Memorial Day today. I'm going to flip you guys around here. All right, there you go. There is the Coolidge tree here in Camden, New Jersey. Beautiful blue skies on this Memorial Day. Finally some nice weather. It's been a miserable, miserable weekend of weather here. So there you go, the Coolidge tree. Planted July 4th of 1926 in the presence of President and Mrs. Calvin Coolidge. So pretty cool stuff. And there you go, Coolidge tree. Good stuff. Thanks, guys.